This is Eitan Weinstein.
And I'm Naor Menninger, and you're listening to Two Nice Jewish Boys.
In collaboration with Australian Jewish News, check them out at ajn.timesofisrael.com. Also in collaboration with Arutz Sheva, israelnationalnews.com. On October 1st, 1939, Winston Churchill gave a speech on BBC Radio. When talking about the Soviet Union, Churchill said it is, quote, a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. Now, 82 odd years later, while that definition is still true to modern-day Russia, it's just as much true about another country the West is struggling to understand. That country is, of course, Iran. Iran is vast, with 1,684,000 square kilometers. It is larger than the combined territories of France, Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, Spain, and Portugal. It's the 16th most populous country in the world, with almost 83 million citizens. It has an army of almost 1 million people. And all of this might is ruled by a bizarre combo of a kinda-democratically elected president alongside an almighty supreme leader, the Ayatollah. Iran is the number one sponsor of terrorism on the entire globe. With the intent to spread the Shiite Islamic Revolution, they are the main funding source for terror organizations such as Hamas and Hezbollah, and they also don't hesitate to kill their own, with tens of thousands of innocent Iranians who died for no reason since the 1977 revolution.
1979.
Last week, a new president was sworn to office in Iran, Ebrahim Raisi, the Butcher of Tehran, who massacred thousands of innocent Iranians when he served in various roles in Iran's judiciary system. Today, it is safe to say Iran seeks to become a world superpower and eventually destroy the small devil, Israel, and the big devil, the United States. Will they succeed?
No.
To try to understand what makes Iran tick and to answer this question, we figured we'd bring someone who knows it best. Today, we're joined by Dr. Tamar Gindin. Dr. Gindin is an Iran expert from the Esri Center in Haifa University. She's also the host of the podcast Enriched Iranium in Hebrew, which by far the best podcast name I've ever heard. We're super happy to have her on the show today. Thank you so much for joining. How are you?
Thanks for having me. And,
Wow,
and Enriched Iranium also has a few episodes in English, and the name is by Dokenan.
Enriched Iranium. Guys, check it out. I mean, it just makes me want to listen to it. The name, right? Like, it doesn't matter what it's about. It could be about something completely different. I'll go listen. Okay, that was the toughest intro I've ever done because there's so many potholes that I was...
Yeah, but you said Ebrahim, you said, right? Raisi.
Raisi.
Yeah. Raisi, yeah.
Raisi. I'll work on my Persian accent. So
you're fluent in Persian. We talked about it.
Yeah, I sometimes talk in Persian-speaking media.
You don't work for the Mossad yet?
I won't work for the Mossad. They tried to recruit me twice, and they said I have to cut off all my relationships with Iranians and Iranists in Europe. And I said, no way.
And delete your social media accounts.
And delete all my social media accounts, my blogs, not appear on TV.
Come on. I mean, you could have done the rest, just not TikTok, right? Up until TikTok.
I don't have TikTok. I'm old.
No shit. No, not about the old, about the no TikTok.
No,
none of us have TikTok. Yeah.
So where do we start from?
Even from your speech, we have a few points to start. For
Right,
example,
so
you
tell
said
us
the
where
Ayatollah.
Okay.
Saying the Ayatollah is like saying the rabbi. Ayatollah is a religious...
But he is an Ayatollah.
He is an Ayatollah, but Ayatollah is just his title. His name is Sayyid Ali Khamenei. Sayyid is also a title. Ali Khamenei. And there are many Ayatollahs. Some of them don't recognize Khamenei's Ayatollah title because they say he didn't receive it in the ordinary way, in the right way. Some are in jail because they oppose the regime. So being an Ayatollah is definitely not enough.
So I know where we're gonna start from. Why do they despise us so deeply?
First of all, the Iranian people don't despise us so deeply. Actually, they like us much more since the Islamic Republic started telling them that we're the small devil. Because, like as many Iranians tell me on social media, my government says you're bad, which means you're necessarily good. Everything that the government likes, the people dislike, and the other way around. And it's always been like that. When the Shah liked us, there was more anti-Semitism among the nation than now, when the government says, I say it's rhetorics, but when the government says that Israel should be wiped off the map, they don't say we should be wiped off the map.
Yeah, but they work
on
with
its own.
proxies, so
Why is there that
I think it's mostly rhetoric because Iran is a Shiite country in the middle of the Islamic world, which is mostly Sunni, and they weren't originally Muslim. They were Zoroastrian before, and they're not Arab. Iranians are Aryan, Turks are Turkish. And most of the other Muslim countries in the Middle East are Arab. So they have to be like more righteous than the Pope, only in the Islamic way. And they have to show that they care more about Islam and that they are the protectors of the Islamic world and especially the protectors of Palestine, because they have to show that they care more and because they're trying to unite the Islamic world around them and not around Saudi Arabia, which is their most bitter enemy.
But we heard it's just a rhetoric before, right? When you say it, it rings a bell. We've been there, and we failed last time to recognize if that was a rhetoric or not. I'm talking about the 40s. So why should we take the risk now and presume it's rhetorics?
Because the day after they wipe Israel off the map, which won't happen, but if they did, they have no legitimacy to rule their people and to torture their people like they do. If you have an external enemy, you can say, this is not a time now for reform. It's not a time to protest for human rights and against hijab and all that. We're in war. We're being attacked. We're in a psychological war, moral war, economic war. Now there's also the marine war.
As Friedrich Hayek said, emergency is always the excuse used by regimes to stomp on civil liberties.
And some say that actually Saddam Hussein, when he attacked the new Islamic Republic in 1980, actually saved it because most of the people were opposed to the Islamic Republic. The whole nation brought about this revolution in 1979 because they didn't want the Shah. But there were communists, there were intellectuals, there were bazaris from the market, and there were the Islamists. And
why do you think it is necessarily rhetoric? Like why is it that you feel that the people of Iran? I mean, you say that you're in touch with certain people on social media, but are there polls from Iran that say that most people don't agree? I mean,
it's very difficult to know from social media because I'm aware that people who are in touch with me are aware that they are in touch with an Israeli and they're taking this risk because they hate their government. I mean, they're filtered. I'm not in touch with everyone. And once in a while we do see, I also follow like Telegram channels and Twitter accounts, and I passively follow also the bad guys. But and I do see there is more talk against Israel. Actually, I think that after 2014, that was the turning point from favoring Israel to hating Israel or less favoring Israel because the Palestinian propaganda was better than ours.
In the regime's rhetoric or in the people?
Among the people. I'm talking
people.
among the people. The regime's rhetoric has been the same.
So give us some kind of breakdown. I mean, like, what percent of the population do you feel, or is there evidence to show that a certain percent of the population feels a certain way towards Israel?
It's very hard to tell.
It's very hard.
It's very hard to tell
it's all
because
kind of qualitative assessment.
Yeah, it's qualitative, and I can say there are people who say this, there are people who say that, but I can't say how many. But for example, in almost all the protests against the regime, one of the slogans you hear more than, and it's been around for more than a decade and a half, is Na Gaza, na Lebanon, Janam Fadaye Iran. Not Gaza, not Lebanon, my soul is devoted to Iran.
But that doesn't mean they love Jews.
No, it means that they hate the fact that their regime gives the money from their oil and their taxes to wars that are not theirs.
Yeah.
And they
But
say...
isn't it safe to say that still the regime has a very strong base among the population?
Not really. Actually, I think that if the regime were not as violent in how do you say, in squashing the protests, we would have seen a regime change. The regime doesn't have a lot of support. If it did have more support, it didn't have to arrest and torture all these people who are protesting against it. If they did have more support in the last elections, they could have filtered more candidates that were eligible and that had all the prerequisites and could actually win, but they wanted Raisi to win. So they had to eliminate all his rivals who had a chance. And there were rivals who had a chance. So
why, again, going back to Noah's question, why do they despise us so much? And if it's just in order to have a scapegoat, I mean, why not rally around Myanmar? Or, I mean, maybe a less Muslim country.
There's a wonderful video, I think it's from the 2009 demonstrations, that the person with a megaphone says, Margbar Israel, death to Israel. And everybody shouts, Margbar Russie, death to Russia. If you come to an Iranian and say, I'm from an enemy country, Israel would not necessarily be the first guess. There's the Emirates and the fight over the 3 islands. There's Russia and the geographical fight over the Caspian Sea. There's Iraq, the sworn enemy. Now they're in love because the Islamic Republic is also backing the Shiites in Iraq. There's Saudi Arabia, who's competing on the hegemony on the Islamic world.
Mm-hmm.
So Israel would not necessarily be the first enemy.
So it seems like they have a lot of enemies. They're definitely at odds with the West. Why is that so much? Why is Iran at odds with the West?
It seems that Iranians have a tendency over history, and when I say over history, I mean like 3,000 years, to go from one extreme to the other. And we can start with the prophet Zarathustra, who took the Indo-Iranian religion and turned the bad guys into the good guys. He just switched the demons and the gods. In Sanskrit, in India, Deva is God. In the Avestan, in the Iranian scriptures, Daiwa is a demon. Ahura Mazda was the Zoroastrian head god. Head god or godhead? I always forget.
Head god.
Okay.
Sounds more right. I've never heard either.
Okay. It's like face palm and palm face. I never remember the order.
Face palm.
Face palm. Okay.
That one I know. Anything related to emojis, I'm good.
Ahura Mazda, who's the head of all gods, is in Sanskrit Asura, which is a demon. So he just switched the good guys and the bad guys, and that's Zarathustra. We can go to mythological time. We can go to Cyrus the Great, who was seen as a savior in Babylon and in Media that he conquered and united. We can see it at the end of the Sasanian times when the people despised the Zoroastrian religion because it was the state religion and just embraced Islam. And we see it in the Islamic Revolution. The Shah was open to the West. He had reforms that tried to westernize Iran, he and his father. In the 1930s, there were 6 years that women were not allowed to go out of their homes wearing hijab. It was called kashf hijab. And the result was that people wanted to be more Muslim. And the result of kashf hijab was that during these 6 years, there were many women who just didn't leave home. Because for them, going out of the house without hijab is like for me going out of the house without a shirt. Which, you know...
In Tel Aviv, it's okay, but maybe in Kfar Saba, it's more of a problem.
In Tel Aviv, you get a fine if you leave your house with a shirt.
Yeah, so there were women who went out without hijab because they were, they had Tel Aviv mentality. But most women, or many women, didn't leave the house because for them it was...
So it's always vice versa with them, is what you're trying to say.
Yeah, and then they wanted to be more Muslim. In 1935, there was a massacre in the Gohar Shad mosque in Mashhad because the Shah wanted to enforce Western attire on men, and they wanted to wear their Muslim imameh and all their clothes. And there was a clash between people who prayed at the mosque and security forces, and there was a big bloodshed. But then after the Islamic Revolution, when now they enforce Islam, because of the religious coercion, people want to be more Western. They want to be more secular. They're more proud of their Iranian heritage because the Shah tried to make them proud of their Iranian heritage and had the huge celebrations of 2,500 years for Cyrus the Great in 1971. Invited all world leaders, and it had this great emotional speech at Cyrus's grave. And the people wanted to be Muslim, and also they said, stop this wasting our money. We want to know what we're eating for dinner, which is also what's happening now. And then the Shah was not overthrown because he was good. He was overthrown because they didn't realize there was something worse. And actually, the only ones who succeeded in making the Shah's vision come true and making Iranian women hate hijab, and all Iranians want to be more Western and more proud of their Iranian heritage, is the Islamic regime. And the Islamic regime is the worst thing that happened to Islam in Iran. Because now the people don't want to be Muslim. And you can see clergy being chased and beaten in the streets. You can see in protests people breaking mosques or...
you see women take off their hijab and in protest.
Right. That's the hijab protest is actually the most long-lasting and the most widespread protest, because each time we see protests here and there, they're usually geographically confined. They're usually confined in time. But the hijab protest is everywhere and ongoing.
So let's take a step back. Maybe give us kind of a breakdown for people who don't know, including myself, from the Shah in the 1950s, who took over in the 1950s or earlier than that? But from the Shah, through the Iranian Revolution, Iranian Revolution, and then maybe tell us a little bit at the end how we got to
and all that.
Ebrahim.
You have 2 minutes.
You have 2 minutes. And tell us a bit about Ebrahim.
Saying the Shah
Raisi
is like saying the Ayatollah, because Shah means king.
So the
there
last Shah.
There were a lot of kings. The
Yeah.
last dynasty was the Pahlavi dynasty.
Mm-hmm.
There was Reza Shah from 1925. He became Shah. He ruled from 1921, became Shah in 1925, ruled until Russia and Great Britain said, we don't like you because you support Hitler. go to South Africa, and they put his son on the throne, Mohammad Reza Shah. You said 1950s because in the 1950s there were 2 years of the Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, who took over.
Pretend like you knew that.
Yeah, that's why.
Yeah, he took over. He exiled the Shah, and in 1953 there was a counter-revolution by the army, a coup d'état, and only 60 years later, when all the CIA archives were revealed, America finally admitted that it was the CIA who organized this counter-revolution to reinstall the Shah because the people loved Mossadegh.
Yeah.
He nationalized Iranian oil, and he was good. He's actually, I think, the only historical figure who's a hero both among the Islamists and the opposition.
Okay.
Except the people who were very rich and supported the Shah, who didn't like him. But most people really loved him. And in all the revolutions, from the tobacco revolt in, I think it's 1891 or 2, when a whole nation stopped smoking within a week because the Shah, the Qajar Shah, it was the dynasty before, gave the franchise on the whole tobacco market to the British, and by a religious decree from one of the high clergies, the whole country stopped smoking within 1 week.
Because there weren't any cigarettes, or because they...
Because he said that tobacco that went through non-Muslim hands is haram, is forbidden. Because they didn't like the fact that the British are now, they're cutting.
This is the Shah before the 1950s?
Yeah, we're talking now about the end of the 19th century.
Okay.
So let's focus.
No, but what I want to say is that in all the revolutions, I'm not going to count all of them. I just love the tobacco revolt, but in all the revolutions, the clergy were in the lead, but the whole nation was united around one idea. But the clergy never took power because it's forbidden by the Shiite religion. And then in 1979, the thing that the clergy were the leading force behind the revolution, but the whole nation stood around one common goal, one common idea that they all wanted to remove the Shah. But what was different was that this time the Islamists took over and took control of the regime. Now, if you're asking me when the Islamic Revolution started, I can say it started with the Shah trying to revolutionize Iran and make it more Western and make it... he introduced vaccines to every village.
Was he
literacy.
good for Iran in objectively?
It depends what you call good. I mean, he promoted Iran. It also depends for the country. Yes, for the people, depends which people.
Was the average Iranian richer?
I think on average maybe yes, but the gaps were huge. They are also huge now. Okay, but there were people who were very rich and people who were very poor. And he tried.
Okay.
He tried to weaken the clergy because he felt they were too strong, which made them very mad, which made the people like them more. And he exiled Khomeini in 1964, which was a big mistake, huge mistake. He could have incarcerated him. He could have executed him. If he executed,
so many good options,
but he chose to exile him. And then in 1975, he allowed people to go on pilgrimage to Iraq. And one of the people where they went on pilgrimage was where Khomeini sat. And they came back with tapes that they spread all around the mosques. Under the Shah's nose and under the nose of all the security the other nations' security agencies who were present in Iran, because the Shah didn't allow them to go to mosques, because he said the mosques are against me. If you go to mosque, you're collaborating with people who oppose my regime. And maybe if they had gone to mosque, they could have stopped it.
Was the Shah secular?
Yeah.
Like was he atheist? He
Well,
didn't believe in the Prophet Muhammad?
He claimed to have a personal relationship with God. There was the triangle, the Shah, God, and the...
Muhammad?
No, the land. Vatan.
So Muhammad is
homeland.
left out of it.
No need for him.
No need for it. I'm the new Muhammad.
Yeah, he claimed to have a personal relationship. There was, in all the study books, in all the textbooks.
Really? They learned about the Shah and about his relationship with God?
No, but in all in the textbooks, you had the Shah's picture, of course, and you had the triangle of the Shah,
really?
God, and
kind of North
homeland.
Korean a little bit.
Except that they weren't cut off from the rest of the world, and that he did try to open Iran to the world, and he did.
But in that,
it.
I am the leadership is divine kind of sense.
And since the let's move forward. Since the revolution, it's just been a mess when it comes to economy, world relations.
Yeah, well, first Saddam Hussein saved the Islamic Republic because they had to unite around the flag, but he also ruined Iran. So after the 8 years of war, with all the millions of injured, it was probably not 1 million people killed, but 1 million injured is also a lot. And cities destroyed, and the economy destroyed, and families and everything. They had to rebuild everything. So they were busy with that. They also made the mistake of developing agriculture too much, exploiting too much water, more water than they have. So when you exploit too much, how do you call the underground water in English?
Groundwater.
When you exploit too much groundwater, there's no water to hold the ground. So there are sinkholes opening in the midst of cities.
Oh.
I mean, Isfahan and Tehran might have to be evacuated.
Really?
Yeah, because...
Today?
Yeah, because you can't do anything against sinkholes, and you don't know where the next sinkhole will open.
Because the water keeps the ground kind of stable, so they dried out the land, and now it's basically...
Yeah, because, the ground is layers of ground and water.
Yeah.
And it's not straight layers.
Yeah.
So when there's no water, some of the ground might drop, and there would be a sinkhole. That's also what's happening in our Dead Sea.
Yeah.
So they did that, and the religious coercion and all the human rights violations there, and they actually wanted to overthrow the Shah because he was corrupt, or there was a lot of corruption in the elite. But what happens now is that the clergy, who are very, very modest, and Khomeini prays under the apple tree in France. And Khamenei doesn't fly abroad, and he eats mostly fruit. And when he was younger, he used to sit on the ground and not on a chair. They're very humble and modest, but they have billions.
Is that an image that they put out?
It was first. I think they did intend to be more righteous and to be more just, but power corrupts, and they've been in power for too long, and the leader is a post for life. So when Khamenei was elected leader after Khomeini's death, by the way, bad choice of names. I would fire the
copywriter.
It's too confusing.
Yeah. Even I get confused.
Yeah. The first one's Khamenei, and then the first one's Khomeini, and the
Khomeini.
Okay,
Khomeini.
The first one is Khomeini from a city named Khomein.
Oh god.
And the second one is Khamenei from a village named Khamenei.
Khomeini from Khomein and Khamenei from Khamenei. Khamenei, whatever.
Yeah. And it's ha. It's not ha. It's not ha. Iranians don't have ha. They're not Arab.
What is it?
It's ha. There's
Huh.
a difference between what Arabs
It's like
say.
Hebrew. Ch.
Yeah, it's like Ashkenazi.
Khamenei.
It's like a Ashkenazi ch, and there's also the Arabic het is pronounced like he, like an American would pronounce. So when you read Hamas and Hezbollah. No, it's Hamas and Hezbollah.
Hamas and Hezbollah.
Hamas and Hezbollah in Persian would be Hamas and Hezbollah.
Hamas.
No.
With he.
Hamas.
He has an American here. He doesn't hear the.
There are two
As
kinds.
you
nuances.
ha, and ch.
Yeah.
There isn't.
There
yeah.
isn't he.
No, I'm just saying those are the
Yeah, but-
syllables we're talking about.
Yeah, but Arabic has he and Persian doesn't.
Yeah.
So they pronounce it
Ch,
as he.
ha,
Like
and
Hassan
yeah.
Rouhani,
Yeah.
Hassan Rouhani has two of the he, Arabic he, which is he
In
Persian.
English, we just have Chanukah
and chutzpah.
and chutzpah.
So
okay.
when Khomeini carried on, they don't say passed away, he carried on, went on, there's the Assembly of Experts that is supposed to oversee the leader and impeach him if he does something wrong, but actually all their
The
all their
leader, you mean
meetings-
the supreme leader?
the supreme leader.
Okay.
And why is he called leader? He's not called a shah. He's not called a king. He's not called a president. He's not called a prime minister. He's not called a ruler. He's called leader because Shiite Islam doesn't allow clergy to rule. They found, a rhetorical way to make it okay. He's just a leader. He connects God and the people. He
So
leads the people.
this Shiite. Shiite doesn't allow for the clergy to rule, but Sunni Islam does.
I'm not sure. I'm not an
okay.
expert on Sunni Islam.
Okay. So you were saying that the council were supposedly
so the
supposed to.
Assembly of Experts is supposed to oversee the leader, but all their meetings are secret, so we don't really know what they do there. But we do know that after the leader dies, they're the ones who decide who's going to be the next leader. They elect the next
And
leader.
how many people are in this? What did you call it
88.
again?
Assembly of
Assembly
Experts.
of Experts.
Yeah.
88.
88 clergy.
And this is like the Senate, the Iranian equivalent of the Senate, but they're not democratically elected. How do they get there?
I'm not sure about American politics, but there's the Majlis, which is the parliament, the legislative authority. There's the government, which is the executive branch. There's the judiciary. The Assembly of Experts is only made of clergy. They're elected every 8 years in free elections.
Okay. But free elections by the people.
By the people after being carefully filtered.
Yeah, I mean, what happens behind but the system
Yeah.
is that they're
Yeah.
democratically elected, but really it's not democratic.
Heavily filtered,
And,
yes.
and they choose all 88 every 8 years?
Yeah. And they choose all 88 every 8 years, and they're supposed to nominate the next leader. And after
Kind of similar to
almost
Knesset.
almost 30 years. No. The Majlis is similar to the Knesset.
Yeah, no, but I'm saying, okay, so not in their legislative power, but in the
Mm-hmm.
sense that they're a democratically elected representative body that then elects a leader, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
no,
Yeah.
but the leader they elect
It's
isn't
like
the leader.
It's like the
It's like the
electors.
president.
But not really.
In Israel.
But
I'm
not
trying
really.
it's not like the prime minister, because the
But-
prime minister is the president of Iran.
No, but
He's
not
the-
really.
No,
The
okay,
Ayatollah is much more powerful, no, than the
the
president
leader.
of
Depends.
Iran.
The leader is the leader is the most powerful man in Iran. The president is the head of the executive power or branch.
branch.
Branch is the head of the executive branch. He executes orders. He executes the leaders.
in all fields of running the state.
Yeah. He has very little, he can decide very little. And we saw that, for example, when Ahmadinejad in his second term tried to close down ministries or open new ministries or fire ministers or unite ministers,
But that's
he got yelled at by the leader who told him to change everything back.
But that's unofficially. Correct me if I'm mistaken, but officially, the president of Iran he, when it comes like to running the country, he is the responsible and
He's responsible.
and the
but
leader. He's out there like giving a mental support and maybe decide like what's the official.
When Ebrahim Raisi was elected in his victory speech, he said, "I will execute the leader's policy. Everything that comes out from the leader's throat," and he used a wrong word, that's why I say comes out of his throat. Everything that comes out of the leader's throat is the people's will, and I will do exactly
But
as
that's
he
his
says.
policy. But on paper, the job of the president when the state was designed. Right.
Well, the president was, the current definition of the president was actually made up after Khomeini died, because in the time of Khomeini there was a prime minister and a president, and then after Khomeini died and Rafsanjani wanted to gain all the power in his own hands, he said that Khomeini on his deathbed told him that Khamenei would be best as leader, even though Khamenei didn't have the right credentials to become leader, didn't have the basic prerequisites. And he also said that Khomeini said that the prime minister and president jobs should be united. And that was Rafsanjani himself for the first 8 years. And he was the most powerful man in Iran for the first 8 years. He probably wanted to nominate Khamenei because Khamenei he wasn't exactly a nobody. He was president, but he wasn't very charismatic. And he thought that putting someone uncharismatic as leader and he himself having the powers of both president and prime minister would make him the strongest man in Iran. He just forgot that presidency is for 8 years and leadership is for life. And he created a monster.
And but do we know what the law in Iran stipulates if Khamenei is technically more powerful than the president, or?
I haven't read the law itself,
Yeah.
but after Rafsanjani, Mohammad Khatami was elected president, and he was relatively moderate. When we say moderate, we mean relatively moderate. None of them are, great lovers of Israel.
Mother Teresa or
Yeah.
Gandhi.
Yeah.
Where are you, the Iranian Gandhi? We're waiting for you to come out of the shadows.
So when Khatami was elected president, many Iranians thought that now Iran will be, more moderate, less extreme in enforcing Islam and all that. And many Iranians came back to Iran. There was a big euphoria. And very shortly after he was elected, he said, "My hands are tied. I don't make the decisions. I just carry out orders."
When an Iranian, I think it's important to understand this because this is the basics of the. When an Iranian is going to vote,
and that's why you know that this time less than 50% went to vote, because when most Iranians say, when I go to vote, what I do is say, I believe in the system. When I vote for a president, I vote for the person to carry out the leader's orders,
right?
which means I express my faith in the system. And most people who don't come to the ballots do it because they want to protest and say, I don't believe in the system. And you know that in this last election, the second place after Raisi was the empty vote. How do you call it? Blank vote? Was the blank vote.
Meaning a lot of people went and put in a blank piece of paper. But how did that become public knowledge if the elections are so undemocratic? Why didn't the Iranian regime just, shut it up and say that, why isn't it that we see Ebrahim Raisi won by a landslide? 80% of people voted for him. Sometimes
in Syria.
like in North Korea or Syria.
You mean why they don't
there's no vote,
make up results they made up the referendum in the referendum in 1979 or 1980 to decide about the nature of Iran. Would you like an Islamic Republic or not?
That's after the revolution?
After the revolution, it was about 98% said yes.
Of course. So I don't.
More than all the Muslims and more than all the religious people in Iran.
102% voted for.
Yeah.
And some say that the 63% of Ahmadinejad in 2009 was forged, but we're not sure it was because the people who said it live in Tehran.
Mm-hmm.
Is it to basically like avoid scrutiny, avoid too much criticism? Meaning, if I say 90%, everybody knows I'm lying. So let's say a believable number like 57, and people will buy it.
Or are the elections like
Legitimate.
legitimate?
Okay, the Islamic Republic is very good at learning. From elections to election, they learn. In 2009, when Ahmadinejad was re-elected, and some say that it was forced, some say that this was the real percentage, but the people in the big cities don't know what the people in the periphery think. Anyway, it doesn't really matter what happened. What matters is that it brought people out on the street. And there were big protests, you remember, with Neda Soltani, who got killed, and then many other young people, but she became the symbol of the 2009 protests.
Yeah, but in the States...
But that was because people felt that they voted for one person and got another.
But that happened in the United States, both in the case of Donald Trump and in the case of Joe Biden. People went to the streets to protest the results of the election, but we as close as we can to know that those elections were more or less free, democratic, and accurate, and the results were accurate.
Yeah, I don't think Donald Trump is an example for anything.
I'm saying that people went to the streets.
Yeah.
Democrats went to the streets to protest, saying there were, we had the whole Russian collusion thing for the whole presidency, basically. What I'm saying is, there's hardly a question of legitimacy in the elections. You have to go as far as to claim that posts on Facebook somehow affected but I'm saying, where is the evidence that elections in Iran are so undemocratic?
Okay, but first let me tell you how they learn from one elections to the other, and then remember to remind me to answer you about the democratic procedure in Iran, because I love it. It's my favorite
bedtime story.
No.
Fantasy.
How do you say it? My favorite slide? My favorite slide in my lectures about Iran is the Islamic Republic a democracy? Anyway, in 2000,
it's just lol.
In 2013, the Guardian Council, that's responsible for filtering the candidates, was smarter. They didn't filter a candidate that was not favorable for the regime like they did in 2009. Mousavi was not favorable for the regime. The most moderate of all the candidates that passed their screening was Rouhani, who's not that moderate, but he was the most moderate of all the candidates. And then when he won, people were so happy. They streamed to the streets and danced and sang, and there was much rejoicing. And then a president in Iran is always elected for a second term. There has not been one president that wasn't elected for a second term. It's considered, there's a fear that it would make the country unstable, so they make sure he does. That's also what they say about the 2009 elections, that it was forged in order for Ahmadinejad to stay for a second term and not Mousavi, who the people wanted, or at least that's what we know from the protests. So there was no one that the people would want more than Rouhani. And he was a big surprise in these elections. I remember myself and other analysts talking in the media about the next president, who could it be? And when we said pick three candidates to talk about, none of us picked Rouhani, because he was a big surprise. And then in 2017, Raisi was a candidate against Rouhani, but it was a sure thing that he's not going to win. People 4 years ago, young people didn't know who he is. Older people knew that he was an executioner, a butcher, that he had leaders, tons of Iranian blood on his hands. They remembered him from the death committees in the 1980s. But it was the first step to bring him to the front. So it was okay that he didn't win then. Then he became the head of judiciary in order, again, to make him more prominent. In this post, he also accumulated more Iranian blood on his hands in 2019, and is head of the body that executes people, that sentences people to death. And in these elections, is it okay to say not dirty words, but to use dirty metaphors?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a fisting of the... Okay, sorry.
No, but
Not quite.
everybody knows that the regime pees on the people, but this time they peed from the jump board. Okay.
Mine was better.
Speaking of Donald Trump. So everybody says they pee what? They pee on the people, but
It's like in Israel, there's a saying, everybody pees in the pool, but this time they peed from the jump board.
Okay. From the diving board.
Diving board, yes.
Yeah. It's like, really, I don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
Okay, I see.
Okay.
So this time, the Guardian Council, which is the body that filters, that screens the candidates, screened out. Well, Ahmadinejad is always screened out. Since he was, he's not president anymore. He's a persona non grata in the head of, in the top.
Well, can he run again? I don't understand.
He can't run immediately for a third consecutive term, but he can run
again.
Yes.
But
Rafsanjani ran against Ahmadinejad in 2005.
But that's faux pas, meaning when you do it, like...
No, it's because he started talking against the regime, and he says there should be free elections without the Guardian Council, and things like that.
I see. Big no-no.
Yeah, but... So he was filtered out, that's okay, but Ali Larijani, the former head of parliament, one of the 5 Larijani brothers who are the most powerful family, his brother... sits in most of the committees, including the Guardian Council, including the, I don't remember the English name, but in all kinds of committees and councils, his brother was also the head of judiciary before Raisi. So, and he himself, he's a conservative. He was the head of parliament. He's very loyal to the regime.
But he wasn't allowed to run.
No, because he had a chance to win. This is why the Iranian people feel that they were peed on from the diving board.
Okay, we don't have much time, and there are a few things I think we got to talk about.
Can we talk about how stupid Raisi is?
Yes, I want you to just explain who Raisi is. You wanted to answer... This is the agenda.
Oh, okay. I wanted to answer a question about why is it democratic?
Yes.
Because we do have free elections every 4 years for presidency, every 4 years for parliament, every 8 years for the assembly of experts, for city councils. It's all free. We also have separation of powers. We have the executive branch and the legislative power and the judiciary. Only the judiciary is not elected, but it's a professional system. It's not elected anywhere. But the head of judiciary is nominated directly by the supreme leader. And for the free elections, there's this body called the Guardian Council. That is
like Guardians of the Galaxy, but less cool.
It's the Guardian Council of the Constitution. They guard the Constitution. Every law that's passed in Parliament goes to the Guardian Council, and they say if it's okay or not.
It's like the Israeli Supreme Court, basically.
How many?
What?
How many make up the Guardian Council?
12 members, 6 clergy nominated directly by the Supreme Leader, and 6 legislators, mishpatanim.
Lawyers,
more or
legal
less.
experts.
Legal experts nominated by the head of judiciary, who is appointed directly by the Supreme Leader. So it's actually basically 12 people, half appointed directly by the Supreme Leader and half directed indirectly by the supreme
And
leader.
also mayors and all those roles are with nominations.
No, they have to,
But you wanted us to stay focused.
they're
No,
freely
I'm trying, I'm
elected
trying.
after a screening by the Guardian Council.
Okay, so what
So
you're
the
saying is
Guardian
that all
Council-
all the candidates in all the elections are being chosen basically by...
Yeah, they say who can run for presidency. They can say who can run for parliament. They can say who can run for
But
the
once
assembly
they
of experts.
choose those people...
Once they choose, it's a free election.
And is it really?
We don't really know. It's
But
not.
you-
It's
but
not
you-
anonymous. It's not anonymous. I mean, they have like little numbers on on their ballots. So theoretically, they can trace who voted for who. I don't know if it's ever been done. I don't think it's ever been done, but it's possible.
It's not anonymous. That's a big no-no in democratic elections. Okay. So it's not democratic. But
And-
other than that, let's say we ignore that.
Yeah, if we ignore the filtering and if we ignore the fact that this council, the Guardian Council, also filters laws by the parliament, it can veto or it can say fix this and that, and then if they can't agree, it goes to another council that determines what the regime's interest is.
But let's put that aside for a second. But after the filtering and after the not anonymous voting, the elections are more or less free. We assume.
Yeah, presumably free.
Okay. But they're set
Allegedly
up in such
free.
they're set up in such a way that it can't be considered free because there's no actual rival to the leading
Yeah, and this time
candidate?
all the caricatures, all the memes, all the
yeah.
were about this presidency, this race for presidency being a one-man race. Because it was Raisi and a bunch of people that
So-
can't compete with him.
Who is Raisi? Quickly.
Raisi.
Yeah. Briefly.
According to what the people say, he was nominated as he was made judge when he was 18 because there was the revolution and all the people who were in power in the previous regime were either executed or fled or were incarcerated. So they had a lot of young people in the head of the army and the government and everything. They're now old. But he started there and he just, he grew inside the judicial system until he became the head of judiciary. And I think he has a doctor title, but he can't complete a whole sentence in Persian. I mentioned that
How come? Yeah, you said...
I don't know, but there's in his one of his speeches after he was elected, before he was sworn to office, he talked in Mashhad about the corona, and he couldn't make a whole sentence.
Sounds like Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, he talked about the vaccines, and then he said something like "sari, fori, and relobi" about the vaccines being fast, immediate, and revolutionary. Like revolutionary in the sense of the Islamic Revolution. Or, I mean, he couldn't really make a whole sentence, a whole idea when when he was sworn to office, he read his speech from paper and he made a mistake every minute or two.
Mm-hmm.
So people said, this man doesn't have, the 6th grade education.
And what's the deal about the 1988 massacre?
He was a member of the death committees. It was towards the end of the Iran-Iraq war. And the Islamic regime...
I like the straightforwardness of the name. It's like, we're the death committee. We decide on death.
I'm not sure it was the official name.
Okay.
But even...
It was called the Life Committee.
In his victory speech, he said that I'm not. He didn't say I'm not a butcher, but he said everything I did was for national security and for the people and
Yada,
the people's
yada, yada,
will.
blah, blah,
yeah.
blah. So,
He really thinks
but what was the story there? So at the end of the Iran-Iraq war, what happened?
there were a few thousand people executed, like mass executions of people buried in common graves
Because of what?
because they had
suspicion of
because they had either
collusion?
other ideologies in the
it
regime.
wasn't collusion with the Iraqis. It was
No. It was ideological differences with the regime.
Like communists,
Yeah.
libertarians.
I mean, what was the makeup of those people? Were they communists?
I'm not sure, but I think most of them were communists, maybe Kurds.
Okay. And they were just massacred. What's the number?
Yeah.
Thousands.
Nobody knows. The assessment is a few thousands.
Few thousand.
And now I read that in Sweden, one of his accomplices in that massacre is being trialed for this.
That's a good thing. But even Khomeini's number 2 came to talk to these committees, and he said, "You will be remembered in on the pages of history as executioners, as mass murderers."
So what
And-
kind of a...
And Raisi,
Mhm.
again, it's all things that I'm reading and people say. I don't really know what exactly went on there, but he's the one who decided to stop death row by
Shooting.
shooting
Firing
and
squad.
by firing squad and started hanging because the person executed will suffer more, not because it's cheaper. It's also cheaper, but that was not the reason. It's cheaper, but when they executed people by firing squad, they then came to their parents and asked for the money for the
Wait,
bullets.
so the hanging is cheaper
Yeah.
and the person suffers more? Because they
Mm-hmm.
choke to death? Or I thought when you hang someone that breaks their neck and they die.
It depends where you put the news.
Ah, okay.
And
If
how
you put
fall and how far the fall is.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you put, I was, I heard a lecture about, there was the exhibition of bodies in the Madatek in Haifa.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Yeah.
it's a,
It was a while ago,
it's
no?
an, yeah, it's an exhibition that,
Yeah.
long before, more than 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But I had a guided tour there, and he said that if you're ever executed by hanging, ask the executioner to put the noose between cervix.
Yeah, like he knows.
Cervical vertebrae 4 and 5.
He graduated.
because that's
He
the
studied
fastest
medicine.
step.
He graduated medical school. He did internship and residency, and he was like, "I'm gonna become an executioner."
I really don't
I just
know.
love the black...
Yeah.
I don't know what people do that.
I don't know. Probably just money.
Okay, so what kind of a president he's going to be? He's just going to be a yes man of the...
wait, but there
I
was
think we can only be surprised for the better, because we expect him to be so much worse than Rouhani, and we expect him to be so bad to Iran that I would be we're usually wrong in our assessments, so I really hope this one is not wrong. That if we'll be surprised, it would be for the better.
And he gets like an Iran that has no water in many cities. With COVID, I just saw a picture.
The trending hashtag in Iran today is SOS Iran because of COVID. There's 60,000 new patients every day. The health system is
collapsing. I saw a picture of people.
It has
collapsed. Yeah, I saw pictures of people lying like all over the hospital.
Yeah,
on the floor.
If you have an accident, you don't have a bed. If you're pregnant, you don't have a bed. If you just
right.
Do they don't have any vaccine rollout plan, or do they have vaccines even?
They have vaccines, and they
Not
have
enough.
a plan, but
the Chinese maybe vaccine.
Yeah, I think they also have Iranian-made vaccines, but it's not enough, and because of the corruption, the people in the elite got it first, and it's a huge country, and some of it is big cities, but some of it is
The periphery and
the periphery and faraway villages. So you can't vaccinate everyone as fast as Israel.
Right. So you said that you're often or always wrong about, right? You just said something like that.
We were always surprised. I refuse to prophesy because I think everybody should refuse to prophesy after what happened here in 2011 in our neighborhood called the Middle East.
Right. But we did see like the biggest protest was in 2009, right? I think.
I think that in terms of protesters killed, the 2019 might have been bigger.
But when was it
November
like the
2019.
closest in terms? I don't know. They say 2009 was like a real opportunity in that Obama.
We always say that this time it's different, and
Right.
this time they wear different clothes, and this time they're more courageous, and this
Right.
time they have less to lose. And every time we're wrong. But we only have to be wrong once when we say that it will end like the other, like the other ones.
But assuming there's a lot of people in Iran that want a revolution, what can we do? The West, United States, Israel, the CIA, the Mossad. What can we do to help realistically? Like, can we do anything to make it happen?
Some of the Iranian people I met abroad said, please attack us because that's the only thing that will save us from the mullahs. And some said, please don't attack us because we can't survive another war like the Iran-Iraq war. And none of them thought that I don't sit in these, I'm not a decision maker in Israel. I think that one of the reasons that they're not doing it, that they're not taking this next step towards a revolution, there are three reasons. One is that after 2011, before 2011, it was much closer than it is now, because they thought that nothing is worse than what they have. And then they looked around and they see that everywhere where dictators were thrown, more evil powers came to be. They saw it in Iraq with Daesh, with ISIS, and they saw it in Tunis, and everywhere things got worse when the dictator went. They see what's happening in Syria when the dictator doesn't go. And they're afraid that their price will be higher. So that's one reason. Another reason is that they're afraid that once there's no central government, that after another revolution, Iran will just fall apart, like the ex-Soviet Union. Because right now, the Baluchis want their independence, and the Arabs in Khuzestan want their independence, and the Kurds would like their independence, and they're afraid that there won't be the Iran as we know it today. And the last thing is that they're afraid because the West has always interfered with Iran. I talked about it very little, like in the tobacco revolt, because they gave all the tobacco markets to the British. And I said that in 1941 or 2, the British and the Russians told the Shah, go to South Africa and we'll put your son on the throne. And in 1951, with the CIA overthrowing Mossadegh to reinstall the Shah. And they're afraid that the West will interfere again and bring the Mujahideen Khalq, which is even worse than the mullahs. Even people who strongly oppose the mullahs say that the Mujahideen Khalq are worse. And that's the organization that the West
So there's
likes
nothing
best.
we can do.
I think we should keep out.
Mm-hmm.
I think, the West keeping out is generally a good idea.
We should keep out, and that's one I learned when in 2011 they tried to join the Arab Spring and make it an Islamic Spring, but secular. And I wrote on Twitter or Facebook or something, good luck to the Iranian people. In one of their groups, I said, we in Israel support you. And they said, admin, please delete this, clear this, because if I, as an Israeli, express my support, it delegitimizes them.
Mm-hmm.
If they say that Israel is behind this, it delegitimizes them, and it puts the protesters at more risk of torture when they are arrested.
So this might open up a whole nother can of worms, but isn't it about time, or do you agree or disagree, I guess, with this statement? Isn't it about time to say plainly that at the core of the issue, or at least a major part of the core of the issue is Islam. And we look around, and none of these countries, Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan,
Saudi
all of
Arabia.
North Africa, and the Arabian Peninsula, and the Middle East, Iran, Iraq, none of these countries, with all the revolutions and the Arab Spring and the coups d'etats and the American intervention in trying to instill democracy, are ever able to make an inch forward progressively towards the progress and I think liberty that the West stands for. None of them come even minutely close. So the question is why, and I wonder if a core part of the problem is Islam. Or an unreformed Islam.
I once heard that every major religion has like an adolescent stage when it's 1400 years old. And Islam just turned 1400 years old. In Christianity, we have the Crusades, and in Judaism, so I hope it's just a phase. And I think the Islamic Revolution is really the worst thing that happened to Islam in Iran. And once they succeed in overthrowing the mullahs, Iran will become a secular country again. And, it comes and goes. Lebanon was secular, and then religious. Afghanistan was secular. Turkey was secular, and now they're becoming more religious. My friends who live in Turkey, I have Iranian friends who are asylum seekers in Turkey. And they say that how can you tell a Turkish woman from an Iranian woman if you see them on the street? The Turkish woman wears hijab and the Iranian women don't. Because, the Turkish women are not forced to wear it, and the Iranians are. So yes, it's organized religion.
Because what's interesting about Eitan's question is that, as you say, like the Turks, what's in common with Turkey, Iran, and Saudi Arabia? Those are three completely different people. The only thing that unites them is the Muslim culture, right? Mm-hmm. And they are three failed states. You know what I'm saying? So the Arabs, because those are completely different people with completely different. The only thing that
I'm not sure if we should say Islam or religion, because we saw what happened in Europe when Christianity was about 1400 years old. So it's, I think it's a religious zeal when it's taken to extremes, or extremism of every kind is.
But there's a dissonance, right, between like when Christianity was at its first of all, I'm not sure about.
By the way, if I were Iranian, I would just agree with you immediately and say yes, Islam is the source of all evil. But I'm trying to defend it a little bit. If you were part of the 50%, there's 50%, right, that are kind of the opposition, but 50% Islamists. We're not. We don't know. We don't know the exact percentage, and everyone.
But there is a large
on social media. Everyone says that the people expressing the opposite opinion are keyboard mercenaries.
Okay. But it's safe to probably assume that not a tiny minority of Iranians are Islamists.
I'm not, maybe not a tiny minority, but it's not a majority. Definitely, it's just the people who drink sandis, which means people who enjoy, treats from the government. People who have offices, people who have something to lose. If
they drink the government's Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
You were asking?
No, I just say that there's I'm not sure that there was ever such a dissonance, meaning that ever, today the Islamic country stands so far behind. I mean, maybe Turkey is actually an example, and Dubai.
But the Shah tried to do in Iran what Ataturk did in Turkey. It's just that the people were not ready.
Yeah.
And the people became ready only after they were forced to become Islamist. So
Or not. We're not sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
In the 1940s, there was an intellectual named Ahmad Kasravi, and he said that Iran has to give the government to the clergy in order to realize how bad Islam is. And he was assassinated in 1944, so he didn't see the Islamic Revolution and what happened next, but he was kind of a prophet. And I think I didn't say my sentence. Did I say my sentence that
What's
Iran
your
is not an enemy of Israel? Did I say it?
No.
So let me say my
I think
sentence.
you just did.
Iran is not an enemy of Israel. Iran and Israel have a common enemy named the Islamic Republic. And the Islamic Republic is more an enemy of Iran than it is of Israel.
But that's a political agenda. It's not a fact, right?
Well, they do torture the people of Iran. They do execute the people of Iran. They do starve the people of Iran.
Yeah, but Assad tortured the Syrians before they tried to overthrow him. And if they take over, I don't think that, they're going to be a friend of Israel. But, I mean, two of your enemies can fight and neither of them will be your friend, right?
Yeah, but right now, because the Iranian government hates us, the people like us more than they did.
Yeah, so it's like the enemy of my enemy is my friend until my enemy is gone, and then my friend becomes my enemy, and we're back at square one.
Yes, and we see this back and forth all the time, this pendulum.
So, really final questions, the question that I just got to ask. What is the one thing you would say the West doesn't get fundamentally about Iran?
And you have to respect them. What they need is respect, because what Trump did,
Like Aretha Franklin, basically.
what Trump did when he withdrew from the JCPOA unilaterally was hurt their honor, their dignity, and they needed great flexibility. They called it heroic flexibility, in order to explain to their people how come they agree to the terms of the West. They have to explain to their enemies, to their opposition, that the fact that they were flexible with the West doesn't mean you can now have your human rights. Baha'is admitted to universities, don't go that far. On the other hand, they have to prove to the people who do support the regime, but are even more extreme, we have to prove that we didn't sell Iran.
But why do we have to worry ourselves with their needs? I mean,
No.
the JCPOA...
Because if we want to reach an agreement...
Why would we want to reach an agreement with such a tyrannical, murderous regime?
Because the JCPOA itself has paragraphs, I don't remember if it's 26 or 36, that says that if the other side violates the agreement, then Iran is allowed to enrich.
But they were
uranium
enriching
again.
Uranium and building ballistic missiles.
Now,
I mean, it was a sham.
Ballistic missiles were not part of the agreement.
Which is the problem, the basic problem of the agreement.
On one hand, it's the basic problem. On the other hand, they saw what happened when Saddam was not allowed to have weapons, and they don't want to be weak. They do want the power to protect their people, not only against Israel, not only against Israel, but also against their neighbors.
But I think this is where
if now the West withdraws from the nuclear talks, they just go on and have their nuclear bomb, and that would be a real problem.
I am more confident in our ability to keep them from a nuclear bomb without the JCPOA than with it. I think the JCPOA just gives them the guise of, being one of the member of the nations, one of the nations, and while they continue to develop and enrich uranium and not give two shits about the West. In the end, I think it stems from what your statement before. You said your sentence. And I guess that's the heart of the disagreement. Iran to you is not an enemy.
No, I know that there are people who dislike Israel, and there are people who do like Israel. I know there are people who deny the Holocaust or say, "What are you making such a big fuss? You could think it's the first genocide in history."
With that accent of a Polish.
It was actually
Mom.
I heard it in a conference in Poland, but it was from Iranians. And so I realized that not everybody likes us, but they do have worse enemies, and the government oppresses their people more. They threat us, but they oppress their people.
I don't believe in oppressing
in
people.
In his
What do you
speech
mean?
now.
I don't believe people are oppressed. If
You don't believe that people are
if
oppressed?
you are oppressed, get up and stop your oppression. Meaning, at some point,
It's your
will
responsibility.
Okay, that you can say that because you sit here in Tel Aviv and
of
What do you mean?
course,
you know what you're having
Of
for
course.
you know what you're having for dinner, and you know that if you go on that
But
bridge,
we wouldn't be sitting here unless our ancestors adhered to that concept.
yeah, but you
That's the
you
only
can,
difference
But you
between-
can go to that. Well, now there's no reason to. But 6 months ago, you could go to that bridge. I don't know if we're seeing a bridge from the window. It's already getting dark. But you can go to that bridge and with a black flag or pink flag and a sign that says Lech, and no one will shoot you.
if I went with the flag I'd want to hold at the bridge, they might have shot me.
No, but our ancestors
But-
took matters to their own hands and thought that we could be here. That's like
Yeah, but they know they have to sacrifice a lot, and they're not ready to sacrifice
that's
it yet.
the problem.
And also, their parents still remember that what they sacrificed in order to overthrow the Shah, and what happened next was much worse. And they really don't know what's going to happen next.
I think that's the heart of it, is right? Is are they our enemy or are they not?
There was one of the I told you I sometimes take part in programs in Persian, and one of the programs on Manoto TV was a debate whether Israel and Iran should have a friendly relationship or
I'd
a
love to be
hostile
their friend.
No, it was we were 5 Persian speakers.
Yeah.
They could only find one person to say that the relationship should be hostile. It was all, of course, theoretical, not about the Islamic Republic, but Iran. And they found only one person to say the relationship should be hostile, and she said that they should be hostile because of what we're doing to the Palestinians. And then I said, what do you think about Khuzestan? And she said, yes, of course.
Oh, she said that we should have hostile relations because they have a legitimacy to be hostile towards us.
No, she said that Iran should be hostile to Israel because of what Israel is doing
Yeah.
to the Palestinians. And then I told her of what
And
we're doing to
everybody
the
else said
Arabs.
we
And
should
then
be
I
friendly.
said, but yes.
Not one person said we should be hostile towards them.
No, it was an Iranian program, so it was from an Iranian viewpoint. But 89% of the viewers said that the relationships should be friendly.
Okay. I'm sorry. I thought you were on a panel in Israel or something.
No. I was on a panel on Manoto TV with 5 Persian speakers.
Okay.
They broadcast from London, I think.
Okay. I see.
Okay,
Well,
it was a lot to think about. You're on social media. How can people find you?
You can look for Enriched Iranian, and you can look for Tamar Elam Gindin on. I'm mostly active on Facebook. I write my name with a TH because this is the way it's spelled in French and German, and that's what I needed to break the symmetry.
Okay.
So
like the
Tamar-
Jewish Tamar.
Yeah, and I think you'll also give links from
Sure.
your Facebook and Twitter. And
Yeah.
I'm also on Twitter. How do you say strudel?
At.
At THMR. I'm not very active there. And you can see me on YouTube. And
You have a website where people can find out where you're lecturing and or maybe invite you to lecture.
Facebook.
Facebook is the best. I also have THMR site.
Okay.
Just Google me up. I mean, we don't have to give addresses nowadays. And if you're Hebrew speakers, bit.ly/couch lectures. I have 6 lectures there, and one of them is on the 7-day free trial.
Nice. So guys, look her up. Tamar E. Gindin. It's Thamare, and then the last name Gindin. Gindin.
E is a middle initial.
Yeah. So look her up. before we go, we have a collaboration. We are sponsored by Arutz Sheva, israelnationalnews.com. Check them out for articles. We are featured there as well. The news in Israel, israelnationalnews.com, Arutz Sheva, check them out.
Also, the Australian Jewish News, ajn.timesofisrael.com, for everything that's going on in Australia. And last but not least, we accept donations. So please help us out. Go to twinjb.com/donate because we do this on our free time. Check out our YouTube channel. And that is it. Tamar, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Really fascinating.
How do you say
Thanks.
thank you and goodbye in
There are like 5 ways to say thank you.
The most common.
The most common is merci, like French, but the one I like best is sepos gozaram.
Sepos gozaram.
Sepos gozaram.
Sepos gozaram.
Yeah, but you're 2, so you should say sepos gozarim.
Sepos gozarim.
آفرین. خدا نگهدار.
Bye, guys.
Bye.